patio, and it was, it was at least that big, the end of my thumb.
East Nashville.
Could have done some real damage if it had been
East
alive.
Nashville. They had some big hail over there.
Where was that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning. This is Gareth Aden. I'm here on behalf of the Nashville Bar Association's Oral History Project. And it is my pleasure and honor this morning to be talking with John Rowe, who has been a founding partner of one of the growing and successful commercial firms here in Nashville. John, good morning.
Good morning.
If you would, start us off by giving your full name and your date of birth.
John Howard Rowe, Jr., 12/29/1946.
John, if you don't mind, let's start out with your parents and where you were born.
Well, my father was John Howard Rowe, and my mother was Lillian Barbara Cook, and then later, of course, Lillian Cook Rowe. And they both grew up in Robertson County in Springfield, and that's where I was born. And their parents, and, they had extended family, all in Robertson County.
When you got a little older, I think your family moved to Montgomery County, Clarksville, didn't it?
Well, initially we moved to East Nashville. My father worked for Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and he got a promotion to what they called at that time an assistant district manager, and he officed here in Nashville, actually in the Stallman building. And then after about a year and a half, he was asked if he would like to transfer to Clarksville in the same job, but with his own independent office still attached to the one here. So when I was 8 years old, we moved to Clarksville.
And how long did your dad continue to work as a manager for Metropolitan Life?
Well, altogether, he worked for Metropolitan for 32 years. He retired at 62, still living in Clarksville, still working for Metropolitan.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about your mother.
Well, my mother grew up on a farm in Robertson County, and then she moved to Springfield when she was, I think, a junior in high school, and finished 2 years there and had the highest academic average in those 2 years. And then she went to college at Union University, and then World War II came along, and she and my father married in 1942. Later, when I was in the 9th grade, she went back to Austin Peay, finished a 4-year degree, taught a couple of years, went back, got a master's in library science, and then became a school librarian for the rest of her career.
And was she a school librarian there in the Montgomery County or Clarksville?
In Clarksville, St. Bethlehem Elementary School.
Well, I have a feeling that your mom probably had a lot of impact on your education.
Well, she certainly kind of set the bar.
Yes.
But my father was very much in tune with her ideas. Even though he started college a couple of times at Cumberland University, but decided maybe that wasn't for him.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
Had one sister 4 years younger.
And is she still she's living here in Middle Tennessee?
She's lived in Nashville for a time and then moved back to Clarksville and taught middle school social studies until she retired about 3 years ago, and is living there, and 2 of her children are there also in Clarksville, and grandchildren.
If you don't mind, John, let's talk a little bit about your education, starting with your grade school experience, and then we'll move on to high school.
Well, I, of course, started in Springfield, but I only attended one semester of the first grade. I did not go to kindergarten. Then we moved to Nashville, and I was a year and a half at Englewood Elementary School. Then we moved to Clarksville, and I attended elementary school in Clarksville, Moore Elementary School, and then Greenwood Junior High School. In those days, grades 7 through 9 were in junior high school, and
Right.
then Clarksville High School, 9 through 12.
And I believe you graduated about the mid-60s?
1965.
Excellent. What about sports?
Well, I tried playing baseball when I was young and was not very good at it, to tell you the truth, and never could do very well at basketball, but I could play football, and that was my primary sport. Ran a little track, tried a little wrestling, but primarily football. Mainly defensive, linebacker, middle guard on offense, and had a pretty successful career at that, although our teams didn't finish up as well at the end of my career.
How about your summers, John? As you get into high school, it's always interesting to find out what people did.
Well, of course, before I could really work anywhere, I mowed yards and that sort of thing from the time I was 11 or 12. But at age 15, I had been involved in the Boy Scouts. I had gotten my Eagle rank and thought that might qualify me to work at Camp Boxwell. So I applied and was accepted and worked there a total of 6 years. I worked 4 years through high school graduation, or immediately after graduation, in the activity yard. Was director my 4th year there in 1965 would have been my 4th year. And then I had a year of summer camp, ROTC summer camp, so I did not work that year. I had another year I worked construction, but I did work 2 additional years, 1 year as a provisional leader teaching athletics and personal fitness, and then my final year after the ROTC summer camp, the summer following, took on the rifle range and the first aid responsibilities.
Well, I can remember from Camp Boxwell looking up to the people who were in charge of the various areas, and the fact that you were in charge of the activity yard, I know meant you were a big cheese at Camp Boxwell by that time.
Well, I had 7 or 8 guys working for me, many of whom are still close friends, and we keep up with each other pretty well.
And I'm sure that was that experience at Boxwell and being a leader there was a big part of your growing up.
Well, it really was, because we had a lot of responsibility. We not only were teaching the boys, but we were dealing with the adults, the scoutmasters, other leaders of the troop. So you had to be somewhat of a diplomat, you had to be a teacher, and then of course there was just hard physical work that you had to get done, moving tent platforms and building campfires and that sort of thing. And of course, if you messed up, you were penalized, sometimes by washing dishes in the kitchen for a week.
You graduated in 1965, and I'm guessing that you did well in school.
Did very well in high school. I didn't get paid for good grades, but I knew my parents appreciated it. So, and fortunately, I had good luck with that.
Where did you decide to go to college?
Well, I looked around, at a lot of schools, and didn't, have any interest in going to a school as small as my mother did, although, wound up going to one almost as small as my parents. But I looked at Vanderbilt, thought about University of Virginia until they changed their program such that you couldn't get your law degree in 6 years. They changed it to where you had to go 4 years, and I thought I might go to UVA Law School, but doubted I wanted to spend 7 years up there. So I looked around, and it was suggested by a relative that Davidson might be a good school to look at for preparation for law school. And so I focused on Davidson and Vanderbilt and decided to go to Davidson primarily because I didn't want to be that close to home in college.
Tell me about your experience there.
The experience was very good. Of course, when I went, it was all male, and we only had 1,000 students. Interestingly, we were probably the smallest school competing in Division I athletics and football and basketball at that time. Didn't have so much success with football. I was asked by the coach to go out, but he wouldn't give me any scholarship help. And I had an academic scholarship I was concerned about keeping, so it didn't seem to be a good bet. Enjoyed going to the games, but of course basketball games were a big thing. At that time, 85% of the students were members of 12 national fraternities on the campus. The main benefit of being a member of a fraternity is you got better food than in the student union. And we were not allowed to have parties at the houses in those days because there was a strict no alcohol on campus policy. So we would rent venues 20 or 30 miles away and drive all hours of the night to and from.
That's what VFW clubs are for.
Well, we used some. I particularly remember the Hi-Fi Country Club as one of our popular venues, and we had groups such as the Tams, and they were fun parties. And it was a close group of guys, and we knew, of course, you knew people in other fraternities as well. We did not live in the houses; we just ate in the houses and used them for late night snacks and before going to parties and that sort of thing.
Tell us a little bit about where you centered your college undergraduate education. What classes you enjoyed the most?
Well, when I went, I got some not so good advice. People told me to study Greek and Latin. That was really good for law school. I'd had 4 years of Latin in high school. I thought that was enough and didn't want to tackle Greek. Some other folks thought math would be really good, but I was never as good at math. But I did like history, so I decided to major in history, and the head of the department who taught the honors course had the distinction of mentoring a lot of the best students who wanted to go to law school, and his advice was to write as much as possible, and he made sure if you were in his honors program that you did exactly that.
That's good training for law school, boy.
It was great training for law school.
Had you thought about law school before college?
Yes, I focused on it actually beginning about the 8th grade. My father, who sold insurance, encouraged me to think of a profession. And I asked what was a profession, and he said, well, you can be a doctor or a lawyer or a minister. So I said, what does a lawyer do? And he had a first cousin who practiced law here in Nashville, and he said you can, and I knew him. We had been on camping trips together up on an old family farm, so he said talk to him, and so he became my first mentor.
Was that Tom Holman?
Tom Holman.
And he ended up sort of being very important in your legal career.
Well, he certainly did. He encouraged me about Davidson as preparation for getting in a good law school and doing well in law school. I think his professors at Emory, where he graduated, had said they had gotten some of their best students from there. And Tom, of course, when I decided to go to Vanderbilt, he found a really good place for us to live. I was married at that time, and we got into some duplexes over in Roland and Brighton Road, which are almost exclusively Vanderbilt law, medical, and graduate students. So we made a lot of good friends there. And then after my first year, or before my first year, he said, you don't need to worry about a first-year opportunity. You can work for my law firm. So I didn't go and look, and paid a little bit of a price for that. They never had a summer clerk before, and about a week before, he said his partners had decided that $50 a week was about the right number, which was less than I had made at Camp Boxville for the last 3 summers I had worked there.
Welcome to law.
But it was a good summer.
Before we leave your undergraduate school, I think we ought to mention that your grades were exceptional there, as I understand it.
I think I graduated 5th, and of course I spent a lot of time studying. I only held one campus office. I became interested in becoming the defense advisor to the honor court, which I had to campaign for the office and actually beat out a very sharp guy from Nashville for that, who I expected to win, but I was fortunate, and that was a good experience.
And I think you were a Phi Beta Kappa.
Yes, Phi Beta and ODK.
I'm positive that as you approached graduation from Davidson in 1969, you were thinking ahead, and apparently you chose Vanderbilt.
Well, I did choose Vanderbilt. I applied to some of the northeastern schools, but at that time, of course, they've always been hard to get in, Harvard and Yale, but we went up there on a little tour the spring before, and they said, you know, if you were from the Ivy League, they counted your grades 60% and your LSAT 40%. But if you were not from the Ivy League, it was the reverse. And I did poorly on the LSAT. But I did get in UVA and Vanderbilt and got scholarship offers for both, but got a better offer from Vanderbilt, and I thought, Tom Holman said, you know, if you're going to practice in Nashville, you couldn't go wrong going to Vanderbilt. And I thought that's what I might ultimately do. And the other situation was I was married and my wife was a school teacher, and jobs were very hard to come by for graduate students at UVA because it was such a large university and not a large community. And she readily got a job here in Nashville at Oak Hill School, so that was ideal for us.
Who was your wife, and where did you get to know her?
My wife was Emily Hunt, later, of course, Emily Hunt Rowe. We actually initially met in the 3rd grade. When I moved to Clarksville, she was from Madisonville, Kentucky, had moved to Clarksville a little bit before that, so we were both not from Clarksville, and we knew each other at church and dated occasionally, but then started dating steadily my senior year in high school, and then we got married we got married before my senior year because we had been traveling a lot back and forth from Davidson to Clarksville, and it was burdensome, and she took the initiative to graduate in 3 years, and so she found a good teaching job near Davidson my senior year. So
wonderful.
We got married in 1968 when we were the ripe old age of 21 each.
Now, did she continue teaching when you came back to Nashville to go to law school at Vanderbilt?
She continued here. She taught first at Oak Hill School, and then like a couple of years, and then she was in the initial faculty at Franklin Road Academy. She went there. She taught 2nd grade at Oak Hill School and was librarian at Franklin Road Academy.
Did Emily continue to teach after you graduated? Or?
No, when we were in law school, some of our good friends began to have children, and so she decided it was time to start a family. So when I started my career, just about that same time, our first child was born.
Well, she had plenty to do, because I know that you had. So how many children did you and Emily have?
We had 3 over the course of 5 years.
Tell us a little bit about your impressions and the people that you recall important in your Vanderbilt Law School experience.
Well, I guess the most important person to me, I took every course that he taught, was Professor Hartman. He taught contracts, he taught creditors' rights, he taught state and local taxation, So these, of course, were all subjects that I was interested in a business law career, and these were kind of meat and potatoes for that. And he always seemed to appreciate my exams and gave me about the same grade every single time, which helped me.
That's saying something in Professor Hartman's class.
But he was tough. He
Yeah.
was tough. And a lot of people liked him, and some people didn't. But we always got along well, and I always had a lot of respect for him. We called him the Dutchman.
Absolutely. That name was there when I was at Vanderbilt.
And there were other professors. I remember Dent Bostic, who taught property and later became dean, very appreciative of, as Ray Patterson, who taught civil procedure and copyright. Interestingly, both Dent Bostic and Ray Patterson had been former students of Dr. Lester, my college Maine professor. And
Really?
he told me to look them up when I got to Vanderbilt. And he thought both of them would become deans someday, which they did.
That's quite a story. What were some of the students in your class at Vanderbilt Law School that continued to practice here in Nashville, John, that we would know?
Well, John Williams, he initially went with a Appalachian project, but then later came back here to the U.S. Attorney's Office and has been in private practice, for many years since. Tom White, of Tune, Intrican and White, Gary Blackburn,
Yes.
Bill Koch, who became a justice on the Tennessee Supreme Court and is now dean of Nashville School of Law, Paul Sloan, and I'm probably leaving out one or two, but a good group stayed here.
As you approached your graduation from law school, could you tell what area of practice that you sort of wanted to get into?
Well, I always liked contracts, real property, commercial transactions, those sorts of courses. I did well in civil procedure, but didn't see myself, going to court all the time. I was more interested in putting business deals together and acting as an advisor to my clients. So I thought pursuing that side of the law would be my interest. And when I took my first permanent law job, you kind of had to choose. You're going to go the trial lawyer track or the business law track. So I thought it'd be nice to have some experience as a trial lawyer. I didn't know whether I would ever have it. Fortunately, I was able to when I came back to a smaller firm.
I think that you were on the law review in Order of the Coif at Vanderbilt.
Yes, I had a position of articles editor my last year, and that was an interesting experience because we were not, we would get a number of unsolicited articles, and sometimes we would solicit articles. And I remember a couple of those articles I had to rewrite to make them publishable, which fortunately the professors who were involved were appreciative of that.
What was your graduation date?
1972.
Well, what did John Rowe decide to do upon graduation?
Well, I was torn. I had always thought I might like to stay here in Nashville. I had worked for a small firm here, I think, as a summer clerk. They only had about 4 attorneys at the time, but my cousin was there, or my dad's first cousin. He was my first cousin once removed, Tom Holman. And then I had decided to go out of town and clerk my second summer at King and Spaulding in Atlanta, and that was a good experience. But I was still thinking possibly about staying in Nashville, and had a good offer here had I wanted to stay. But my wife thought, Atlanta would be more interesting at the time, and my first law firm I worked for advised me to go to Atlanta. They thought I'd have a better opportunity there than here, so that's what we did.
Well, I think I would certainly like to know what it was like to join a firm that's as large and prestigious as King and Spaulding.
Well, it was pretty heady at first. I mean, or would be in any case. I had clerked there my second year, and one of the attractions of there, we had about 6 summer clerks, and everybody was in the top 5 of their class from, really prestigious law schools like UVA, Duke, University of Chicago, to mention several. And everyone was married. We were all from somewhere else. So we thought, this is going to be an easy place to fit in, and, we enjoyed the people. Of course, and most of them came back, so we had the kind of a built-in group of contemporary friends, when
Yes.
we went. Then when we got there, I thought it was going to be a little more organized than it turned out to be. I was assigned to the corporate department, and I had an assigned mentor, but my office was on the other end of the building, and I shared a secretary with an antitrust lawyer. And the antitrust lawyer and I became good friends. In fact, I had bought his house when we came there. It was the first house we had been in. He was in charge of the summer program, and he was selling about the time we needed one. So we bought his house, and we were next door to each other, and he had a client that had real estate issues, and he didn't want to turn the client over to his real estate partners. He thought he could supervise me doing it. So that's why I say they were less organized than I would have thought. So I was handed a pretty large real estate project to do, and got the help of some of my contemporaries and a little bit of partner help, but not much.
Well, there you go. You were where
So-
you were in the field you wanted to be.
So we were doing it. One of my contemporaries was in partnership tax, and another was in municipal securities, municipal finance. So I put together a real estate acquisition and syndication and securities filing. That was after I'd been there a year. So that was a heady experience.
I can only imagine. And of course, at that time, Atlanta was just beginning to really grow as a city.
Well, it had started really growing in the 60s, and so by the time, a couple of years before I got there, they had just moved to their new office at the top of one of the newer towers, the SunTrust building, and so we had first-class offices and the latest in technology, equipment, but also it was still small enough that most people knew each other. And I remember every Friday morning they would have a whole firm meeting, and they would review the new matters that had come in that week. And it was interesting to hear about that from the people that had brought in the business. And a lot of these were the main things happening in the city, so that was a quite enjoyable experience.
How long did you stay at King and Spaulding, and sort of what happened to make you feel like you wanted to move somewhere else?
Well, as I said, I was there a little bit less than 2 years. I remember I had clerked there in my second year after law school. I had gone there in the summer after graduation, but then had to go to Fort Benning for 3 months, came back in November. And about Christmas time of the next year, I guess it would have been 1974, thinking back, yeah, the end of 73, I should say, right before 74. we at that time had a child. She was a year old. All the grandparents were living in Clarksville, and so we were spending a lot of our vacation time, going back for visits, in Clarksville to see the grandparents and with the grandchild. And my wife had said, it'd be nice if we lived closer to the grandparents. I said, well, that might be, but we got a good deal here. And then just before Christmas, Tom Holman called and said that if I was interested in coming back to Nashville, that there would be an opportunity that I could look into. He had for about 25 years represented First Federal, which was the main non-litigation client that Stevenson, Lackey, and Holman had. And they asked him to become president, and his partners thought that would be a good idea. They were interested in retaining the business, so he asked me if I was interested to set up something with J.G. Lackey, which I did right after Christmas. And he made me an offer I felt like I couldn't refuse, so that's brought us back to Nashville.
You bet. And how was it there at Tom Holman's law office? And who else was there?
Well, of course, Tom was no longer there, but
well, that's right, because he had become
he had
president of
so they changed the name to Stevenson and Lackey. Jay Stevenson, at the time, was 85 years old. He had been a co-founder of the firm with J.G. Lackey and Tom Holman, who were 25 years younger in each case. J.G. actually was 59. Tom was a little younger than that. So Tom was about 30 years younger. J.G. was about 26 years younger. And as I understand, the deal was, he would bring the clients and they could do the work. And that's pretty much what they did. I mean, he brought in attorney's title, he brought in First Federal, and he brought in the Hartford Insurance Company. And when I got there, they were still main clients of the firm. Actually, I guess attorney's title had then kind of morphed into Pioneer at that time, and so we were attorneys for Pioneer, First Federal, and Hartford. J.G. did exclusively Hartford work, although he was on the board of First Federal. Tom had done work with the title company in First Federal, so that's the niche I fell into. There were three other people there shortly after I got there. Nancy Corley was there. She had gone to Vanderbilt and then to at that time, YMCA Night Law School, and graduated first in her class there. And a lawyer named Bob Lewis, who had gone to the YMCA Law School. And then an almost contemporary of mine, a year younger, Jim Creasy, came. He had clerked with the firm the summer after I did. And so, we had a pretty good group of young lawyers, there, as well as J.G. kind of overseeing us. Mr. Stevenson lived in Florida half the year, and then in the spring he would come and take a room in the Hermitage Hotel, and he would saunter into the office every morning about 9, and everybody would go in and have coffee with Mr. Stevenson, and he would tell stories about the old days when he practiced with Walter Stokes, and those were interesting times.
I'll bet they were. Well, you're continuing to hone your practice in the property and commercial area.
Well, I was certainly doing more real estate work. I was working with the title company, and I was handling loan files and title issues for the savings and loan, and I was doing regulatory work. There were a lot of regulations affecting savings and loan, but I was not getting the commercial, corporate, and tax experience that I would thought I would like to have, that a number of my contemporaries were getting. So after about a year, I began to be concerned that maybe my experience was going to be limited, and it would inhibit my ability to develop the practice that I wanted to.
Where did you go as your next office in practice?
Well, Tom introduced me to Ward DeWitt, and Trabue, Sturdivant and DeWitt at that time was the name of the firm. He had suggested I might like that firm because Bill Harbison, who had gone on the Tennessee Supreme Court, had been there and seemed to like it. And Bill Harbison had taught the trial methods course when I was at Vanderbilt. So I thought a lot of him from that exposure. And the firm had just lost they had hired a young NYU tax graduate, and so they had an opening for somebody to, come in and do tax work. And I said I'd taken the tax courses in law school, but didn't consider myself an expert. But Bob Sturdivant said I could go to some institutes and learn. So that was their rationale and excuse for hiring me. Although there was an issue they needed to work through, they said they had just made an offer to Tom Sherrard, who was at that time teaching at Vanderbilt. They would like to hire us both, but they weren't sure they could do that given their size. But fortunately for me, Tom decided he would like to take a little longer to decide by working part-time in the summer, or part-time some in the year and during the summers. And so therefore, they didn't have the problem of taking on two full-time lawyers at once.
Well, that was an introduction to somebody who played a prominent part in your future.
Well, that's true. In fact, before taking the job, I talked with Tom, and we kind of went over our impressions of firms and opportunities in Nashville and whether we thought that this firm would give us the kind of opportunities we were looking for. So that was very helpful to me as well, because I think he had obviously talked to more than just one firm.
Well, back in the mid-'70s, Trabue, Sturdivant, and DeWitt was one of the most prominent offices in Nashville. And tell me about the people that you got to know there and their influence on your life and practice.
Well, obviously, Charlie Trabue was a highly respected lawyer in Nashville, very involved in the community, just a super nice individual personally, as well as a good attorney. And he and I shared a secretary, and that worked very smoothly. In fact, eventually he told me just to take her. I needed her more than he did. He would make other arrangements.
That sounds like something kind he would do.
He was very much that way. Bob Sturdivant was super smart, had, clients such as Worthen Life and Casualty Insurance Company. Charlie, represented Commerce Union Bank. So they were three of the principal clients of the firm at that time. The firm also, and Bob Sturdivant was a man of a few words, and I remember my first day there, a big antitrust issue had come up, and he introduced me to one of his best clients and said I was really smart and I could take care of him. And he kind of signed off, and I could go to him if I needed help, but he said I didn't need much, so but he was super in that way. Ward DeWitt, who I talked with, we had offices next to each other. Didn't work on many matters together, but he was obviously a super friend and mentor, and he represented auto owners and Liberty Mutual in a lot of litigation. Al Abbey was the kind of a real estate and business lawyer I worked a good bit with. Russell Hippie in the same connection. He did banking and corporate, and then Tom Peebles was there. He was litigation. Young Charles Trabue was there. And then we got a couple of younger lawyers there, Jack King, who went into the real estate area, still practicing at Butler Snow, I believe, and Gail Malone, who's now, I think, with the Jackson law firm that just came to town.
While you were there at that firm, did you meet Tom O'Hare during that period?
You mean Jim O'Hare?
Jim O'Hare, I'm sorry, Jim O'Hare.
Now, Jim, I actually met in law school. I think his first year teaching tax law at Vanderbilt, and I should have mentioned Jim earlier because he was one of my main professors at Vanderbilt as well. I took every course he taught in the tax area, but I took corporate tax from Jim, and then I took a seminar in partnership tax, and there may have been another course, but I got to know him there, and he was known to be a tough cookie in terms of grading and demanding, but obviously very smart. He had worked 5 years, I think, with a big firm in Rochester, New York, Hargrave something, and came to Vanderbilt after that and was there my entire time. So I met him at Vanderbilt.
I presume and gather that those years, I guess about 1974 and 1975 till 1981 were years of real growth in your career and your experience in commercial and real estate work.
Well, they really were. When I went to the firm, as I say, day one, they gave me a pretty significant matter to take the lead on. And then things would come in that other partners didn't particularly want to fool with. I remember there was one client who came almost immediately and it was kind of handed off to me, who became actually the longest client I've had dealings with. He was a builder who had retired and come back, named Carl Batson, and who had been the top home builder in Tennessee in 1960.
Wow.
And he retired and came back and decided he would just do deals with he and a bookkeeper. And although he did have other people, he would enlist to help him. And so we did a large condo project for him, and then he had various other real estate projects. And then after I'd been there about 3 years, I remember Russell Hippie had been working with a lawyer in Toronto because he had a client who had a facility in Columbia, Tennessee, and there was some issue about exporting gun parts without a license to Europe, and he'd gotten in trouble with the U.S. attorney, so the Toronto attorney had hired Russell to help him. And then about that time, the Toronto attorney called Russell and said he had this German client that he had represented for some years who wanted to buy a building in Nashville. And what had happened, as I recall, the German had come to Atlanta with his accountant. And the accountant said, the broker said, well, we got this building in Nashville, and the accountant said, well, don't we need an attorney? And he said, well, yes, our attorney can represent you. And the German accountant thought that was a little unusual, so he called the lawyer in Toronto and said, is it normal for the broker's lawyer to represent the buyer? And he said, absolutely not, but I can handle it because I know a lawyer in Nashville. So anyway, I wound up working with him. That turned into a client I continue to represent and have represented for, gosh, I guess 43 years.
Well, that sort of leads me to my next question. I know that you made a major change in your professional life in 1981 when you founded a new firm. Tell us briefly about how that came about.
Well, as I say, Tom came to Trabue, Sturdivant, and DeWitt about a year, full-time, about a year and a half after I was there. And we had a lot of similar interests. He had practiced with another large firm in Atlanta before coming to Vanderbilt, Sutherland, Nasbill, and Brennan. And interestingly, he had gotten an offer from King and Spaulding and Sutherland and went to Sutherland, and I had gotten offers from the two firms and went to the other one. But we had similar experiences there, and so there were a lot of things that we wanted to do in terms of developing the firm more along the lines of a full-scale business law firm. And one of the impediments we thought was that half of Trabue's practice was insurance defense, and the other half was corporate and business. And
Yep.
so we thought that what we would like to advocate is that we begin to transition more to business litigation and still retain the insurance defense as a good training ground for young attorneys, but not make that the main focus of the litigation practice. We were also concerned that that made it more difficult to go after the top graduates every year, both in terms of opportunities for practice and in terms of economics. We're going to be tougher to pay at the top of the scale, which is what we wanted to do. So, and we thought, to move the firm in those directions was going to take some time, maybe more time than we were willing to give it. And we had a meeting with everybody and kind of explored what everybody wanted to do, and it was clear that we were a minority of two against the prevailing wisdom of where the firm wanted to go. So about that same time, Jim O'Hare had invited me to lunch and said he was planning on setting up a firm and would I be interested. And as Tom and I had talked, Tom had always said we need more people. So I came back and said, well, Tom, you know Jim, and there's more people. So then the three of us began to meet and plan for the new firm.
Wow. So now we know sort of the genesis of O'Hare, Sherrard, and Rowe.
Yes, we signed a we signed a secret partnership agreement. Secret because we didn't have an office to go to and didn't want to be out on the street in early December of 1980. And then we looked around for office space, and there was only one building that was going to potentially be available at that time. They were developing the St. Cloud corner, and so we entered into secret negotiations. We told the broker he couldn't disclose the identity, and I think we were the mid-state attorneys or the XYZ law firm at that time. Interesting little tidbit about that was young Bill Harbison had come to work at our firm by that time, and his wife Patty was an associate at Bolt, Cummings, Connors, and Berry, and they were the attorneys for the landlord, and so Patty was working on the lease, and so she came home to Bill and said, there's something big afoot that's secret, and we don't know what it is. Turned out that it was our law firm. And then we had to disclose we were leaving before we intended to, because Jim O'Hare had called the Yellow Pages to make sure we were listed and said he wasn't going to be at Waller the next year. They called Waller. He had been at Waller at that time. Called Waller and said, is it true Jim O'Hare's not going to be here? And so then we had to tell everybody. And they were very gracious. They just said we can't talk to any other associates.
Right.
Mainly Bill, but.
So you opened in 1981, O'Hare, Sherrard, and Rowe, and I guess there were, three partners?
Three partners, one full-time associate, Karen Fuqua, who had been with Tom and I working really almost exclusively with us at Trabue. And then Kay Gabbard agreed to work half-time, Craig Gabbard's wife. So we had 4.5 attorneys. We had a couple of secretaries that had come over with us from Trabue. And
flash forward till today. How many attorneys are at your office now?
by last count, I think we've got 39, but we've got 2 more hired for the fall.
Tell me, you have explained very well the sort of the concept that you and Tom Sherrard had in mind when you launched your new firm. Tell us briefly how that's gone and where you think you had this success.
Well, I think, the concept was a good one. Obviously, I think our timing was good too, because there weren't many very large firms in Nashville at the time. I think maybe the largest was about 25 at that time, probably Bass, Berry, and Sims, and Waller, Lansden, Dortch, and Davis, maybe Bolt, Cummings, Connors, and Berry. They would have been and maybe Gullett and Sanford was kind of in there too, as one of the larger ones, Neal and Harwell. So, and of course, all those firms are still around, but we were also coming out of a recession, and Nashville was beginning to grow. But I think coming out of that recession, with interest rates coming down, Nashville growing, the one thing that we didn't have going for us, which I remembered about 5 years before, another firm was formed called Harwell, Barr, Martin, and Sloan. And Johnny Harwell had been at the Trabue firm years before. And the conversation around the office was, well, I think they're going to make it because they've got some really smart people, but they've got some people with Nashville connections. And that seemed to be the recipe, that you needed to have Nashville connections to get the business, even if you had a really smart group of lawyers. Well, as it turned out, we didn't have anybody from Nashville. So we were going a little bit against the grain. I was the only one from Tennessee. Tom had grown up in West Virginia, and Jim in the St. Louis area. So we didn't have any Nashville connections, other than we did have connections with Vanderbilt, and that was helpful, particularly since Jim and Tom had taught there. That gave us some street cred with the best students and the faculty to recommend that they take a chance on us.
And gosh, what is it, in about 40 years?
40 years this year.
What are some of the main clients that you're proud of that have come to your firm and become regulars?
Well, interestingly, one of the early ones that kind of gave us a lot of credibility before, we really had it in terms of large credit, was Nissan.
Yeah.
Tom was very proactive in that. He got a call from someone at Vanderbilt, said that Nissan was looking for a general counsel, and he had worked with a lady named Gail Newman on a deal down in Birmingham. She was with a healthcare company down there, and I think some changes were going on, and he thought she would be a good fit, and he recommended her, and the company hired her, and soon we began to get some work, from them.
Boy, that's wonderful.
So,
Who else have you sort of acquired as major clients over the years, John?
well, Jim O'Hare had a lot of ties at HCA, and he was instrumental in helping me get, work with the real estate department. And for a number of years, we did condominiums and other things for their real estate development in terms of offices. I can't say that we retained that business, but it was a good shot in the arm, initially. And then we got a partner, Kim Brown, came to us, I think in the early 90s, from what had been Dearborn and Ewing, which, disbanded.
Right.
And Kim, works for about every bank in town. I could, in terms of doing loan work, I could name them all, and I might miss one. So we've, of course, a big difference today is the banks work with everybody. They don't just send it all to one law firm. So that is the case. For a time, we represented Gaylord. In fact, we did all of their work, but they had a change of management, and we went from that being, our largest client to being a non-client. But what we've learned over the years is our bread and butter are mid-market clients. Clients where, they're not big enough to have a legal department, to parse out the work, but
Yes.
and where the lawyer works with the person writing the check or the person right below the person writing the check to do the work, and you become, a business advisor as well as an attorney, and that's been our bread and butter. So we've got a lot of clients that wouldn't be household names, but that's the mainstay of our business.
You have a name partner now that was my predecessor as president of the Nashville Bar, Bill Harbison,
Yes.
and a wonderful person. How did you get Bill to come?
Well, there was a little bit of drama in that Tom and I had recruited Bill to come to Trabue. And I guess Bill was destined to come there anyway because his father had been there, and many of his best friends, were still partners there, and we were looking forward to practicing with Bill. However, when we left, Bill had just come with the firm shortly. We didn't feel that would be right to talk with Bill for all those reasons, or to try to sway him in that direction. But after we left, from time to time, we would check in on him and see how he was doing. And that went on for a couple of years. And I think eventually he reached the conclusion on his own that the direction we were going was more in line with what he would be interested in doing. And so he came. I think it had gone on for a while, and I recall I did give him a call and said, Bill, it's time. You need to fish or cut bait now.
And Bill also adds to your firm, I think, a good deal in that he also is a person who goes to court.
Yes. Yes, and one thing I would mention, when we started, we did not have any litigators at all. After a couple of years, Ken Jones, who had been at Bass, Berry and Sims, came. I think Bill came first, and then Ken Jones, shortly thereafter expressed interest. When Bill came, he didn't know what he was going to do. I mean, Bill's one of those lawyers that would do it all. He would do estate planning, he would do corporate, he could do litigation. And for a number of years, he was not willing to commit himself to be primarily a litigation attorney. But we did get Ken, and then Bill had developed a reputation for trust and estates litigation from a case he took early on in his career. And then we had Ken, and eventually, we got others, Mike Abelow, Phil Kramer, so that now, today, I would say probably a majority of our practice is litigation.
When was it? I believe it was it early on after the Pinnacle building opened that you moved to the Pinnacle?
Yes, we started at St. Cloud. We were there from 1981 to 1989, and then we thought we got a good deal to move over to the SunTrust tower. So we were on the 20th floor there for 21 years, and that was a good place for us. We were on 2 floors. When the Pinnacle building came along, we negotiated whether to stay at SunTrust or go to Pinnacle. The advantage of Pinnacle at the time was we could get all the lawyers on 1 floor, which we thought would be good, and we could get parking places for everybody. And so we had an unusual arrangement. We had the lawyers all on 12, and all our conference rooms and our management staff and bookkeeping on 11. Since then, we've expanded and put attorney offices on 11 as well, but not the whole floor. And we didn't build a monumental staircase either, so that that was a debate we had for a while.
Anything else about the tremendous and prosperous growth of your firm, or have we pretty much covered the main points?
I think we've covered the main point. As I say, the surprise to me, well, let's put it this way. We wanted to be primarily a business law firm, and we've done that. We wanted to hire top graduates, and we've done that. And we wanted to, have first-class equipment, support, and resources, and we've done that. I think the surprise to me has been how much, we've gotten into the litigation sphere, which was not our main focus initially. Right. Was real estate, tax, corporate, securities, and which we still do all that, but we do a lot of litigation, and we do a significant amount of contingency litigation in the mass tort field and some other areas like that.
That's fascinating. Let's take a minute, if you don't mind, and loop back. We've done a good job, I think, in covering your legal career, but let's talk about your family. And where we had left off really was you and Emily were married, came back to Nashville, had children. Tell me about the children that you had.
Well, the oldest, Lillian, born in 72, of course, lived briefly in Atlanta, but she doesn't remember any of that because she left when she was about a year and a half old. So she grew up here in Nashville, attended Ensworth and Harpeth Hall schools. Later went to Davidson to college. Met her husband at Davidson.
Let me guess, she's in real estate law.
Yes.
Where is she now?
She practices at Reno and Kavanaugh. They have offices in Washington, D.C. and here in Atlanta. here in Nashville.
That's a wonderful story. So that's your oldest daughter?
Yes.
And who was next in the family?
John Howard III, John Howard Rowe III. John went to the same schools as Lillian, Ensworth, MBA, not Harpeth Hall, and Davidson. And John always had an interest in I'll call it in critters. When he was young, he would chase lizards and so forth out at the Sequoia Swim Club, rather than want to go swimming. And he majored in biology in college and worked at a ecology lab in Georgia, and then got a master's in ecology from Purdue. And then he went to Canberra, Australia, and got a PhD in ecology from the University of Canberra. And he now is a professor at UNC Pembroke in Pembroke, North Carolina, teaching ecology, zoology, and field biology, environmental science, and he studies turtles, box turtles.
That's incredible. Your mother would be very proud of these children. What about your third?
Well, Alan, of course, went to the same schools as John, Ensworth and MBA. He started at James Madison for college, and after 2 years transferred to Davidson. I think the experience the two older children had at Davidson, he was envious of. Particularly, they had a very active outdoor club. And Alan and John both wrestled in high school, but Alan retained more interest in it than John, and he thought he could wrestle at Davidson, which he did. he was not able to make the team at James Madison because he was a walk-on, and they had their scholarship people picked.
Yeah.
But so he did 2 years at Davidson, and then he went to the University of Montana, got a master's in American history. I think it was American environmental history, actually. And then he taught a couple of years at Asheville School in Asheville, North Carolina, and then he decided he wanted to get a PhD in history. And for some reason I've never fully understood, he decided he wanted to get it in Russian history. So he interviewed with the professor who later became his main advisor at an academic conference, and he said, well, he would admit him, but he wouldn't give him any funding. And I told both of my boys that if you're going to be teachers, you need to get paid to go to school, not have to take out loans, to do it. So Alan asked his professor if he went to Russia and became fluent in Russian, would that help him? He said he couldn't promise, but it would definitely be a factor. So that's what he did. He went to Russia for 2 years, supported himself teaching English to Russians.
Wow.
And became fluent in Russian, and then came back and went to Georgetown. And then when it got time to do his PhD, he went back to Russia for 2 years. He got a Fulbright 1 year, and then they defunded it, and then the Mellon Foundation picked it up. And then since he hadn't gotten a Fulbright, he was able to get it the next year. So he spent 2 years in Russia.
And let me guess, he's now a professor of Russian history.
Well, yes and no. He's had an appointment this year as a visiting assistant professor at the University of West Virginia. But unfortunately, positions in his field are rare. I think there was one opening in the country last year. So he got his PhD in Russian environmental history, wrote a history of Russia's national parks that was published by Oxford Press. But he will likely go to work for government or maybe back in a private school environment in D.C. He did reconnect with his wife while he was over there. She was from Moldova, and she was a doctor there, and now she's going to George Washington on a cardiology fellowship.
Wow.
So that's why they're going back to D.C. And I should mention John met his wife at the ecology lab in Georgia, and she's now a practicing nurse in Southern Pines, North Carolina, where they live.
How many grandchildren do you have now, John?
Well, I have 6 at the moment and 1 expected in April. But my wife and I, Jane, Emily died in 2002, and I remarried in 2004. And my wife, Jane, who's a lifelong resident of Nashville, has 8 grandchildren. So our mutual count will be 15.
Oh, man. Well, that's a wonderful story, and it's also an homage to your mother, who obviously was a person who believed in education.
Very much so. She was, her biggest disappointment, though, in me, which she held her tongue and didn't mention it for 25 years, was when I graduated from Vanderbilt, I was to get an award. But I had decided that I was going to have to wait a week from the time of my last exam until the graduation. And I really wanted to go to Europe with my wife, Emily. And so we were able to go to Europe for 5.5 weeks. But I missed graduation. So when...
And Mom didn't like that.
Well, she didn't say anything. She got the paper clippings and put them in a scrapbook for me years later. So 25 years later, when my daughter graduates from Vanderbilt Law School, we had a dinner, and my daughter said, she called her Nanny, said, "Nanny, what did you think when your son skipped graduation, she said, I was so mad I could spit, but I didn't say anything.
Oh, that's wonderful. We're getting near the end, but there's another important aspect of your career that I wanted to talk about, and that's the fact that you have been active in the community. And I know one of the things you've been active in, because I am too, is the Boy Scouts and the scouting movement.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think somewhat in the mid-'80s, we had a young attorney, Marshall Green. I don't know whether you remember Marshall.
Yes, I do.
But Marshall had worked at a summer camp, as I had, and in fact, that was one of the reasons I was interested in hiring him. I thought he would be resourceful, and which he was. And he got involved, and so he and Ed Landquist were working a lot with the West District, so he challenged me to get back involved, with scouting, at the district level, and so I did, and was on the West District Committee, and then I was West District Chairman, and on the executive board. I guess I've been on the executive board for, about 30 plus years. So I did that, and then when my sons were coming along, I was assistant Webelos leader a couple of different times, and then my oldest son went to Troop 121, became an Eagle there, and I was on the troop committee and then became troop committee chairman and recruited Jim Felch to be scoutmaster and suggested he get John Bryant, who was a patient of his, so they had took that over. So I hadn't been involved there for a long time, but I've stayed involved with the council and presently on the executive committee and what they call endowment chairman, trying to raise money for the endowment. So I've done that. I also, back in the 90s and early 2000s, got involved with Habitat for Humanity and served on that board for a total of 7 years. I guess my last year on the board, 6th year, I was president, and then I was kind of chairman and then chairman emeritus the next year. So I did 7 years there. Did a lot of legal work for them, and I guess I'll have to credit Tad Harris with this. Tad had been on the board, and as I did, did a lot of free legal work, and so Tad, I think when he was going off the board, suggested that maybe they needed a full-time attorney, and because they had about a $13 or $14 million a year budget at that time, and they needed some institutional knowledge, and so Tad offered to do it, and I talked to the executive director, and she said, well, I'd like for you to make a proposal. And I said, well, Chris, I said, Tad would be an excellent attorney, and I think I could do a good job, but you don't need Tad or me for this job. You need a younger lawyer, because we're kind of long in the tooth. And so anyway, about that time, my daughter had gone to Reno and Kavanaugh doing affordable housing, so I suggested they hire her and I would mentor her. Well, the interesting thing is, soon after she got there, they got into a big case about zoning up in North Nashville. They had bought about 400 acres, and so they were getting in litigation. And she said, who should I get? And I said, hire Tad. And so Tad, wound up and did a great job in their litigation.
Well, that's a wonderful, wonderful outfit. That's a hands-on
and
community thing.
That'd been a lot of fun. And then, I've been at times more active than I have in recent years at Westminster Church. So that's where we go.
John, this has been a wonderful trip through through the recent history, really, of the Nashville Bar and your firm. Looking back now, over 50 years of practice, any comments or thoughts you have about the direction of law practice or the things that are important?
Well, one thing is I was thinking about it, back when firms were smaller, I thought there was a lot more informal contact among attorneys from different firms, and maybe even within firms than there is today. The firms have gotten so large, people communicate a lot of times by email and telephone. You know, there's less in-person contact. There's less informal contact, I think, among people of the different firms. I mean, back when I started, you know, you typically knew everybody in your firm reasonably well, and you knew a lot of the other attorneys, at least that practiced in areas that you did somewhat. What I've figured out from this is I think the only way for young attorneys to develop contacts and relationships more broadly within the bar is to get active on committees of the Bar Association. That is the best way, I think. I know I enjoyed that. I haven't done nearly as much as a lot of lawyers, but I did get active with the real estate section of the TBA for some years and chaired it 1 year, and then not too long after that, Lee Corbett was chair, and he recruited a committee I served on where we redrafted the condominium laws, and that was a really enjoyable experience and a chance for some camaraderie with a lot of good attorneys I respected. So I think that's more important. Another thing that's a little disappointing, I mean, people used to get together in person and negotiate more. That tends to be just by cryptic emails and so forth, and you send it to the client. What do you think about this? Can I send this? And you do it rather than sitting down at the table and negotiating. I miss that. And that's, you know, that's a big thing. And then, you know, just the fact that everything moves so fast. It used to be, you know, you would carefully craft a letter, think about it, send it out. Now you have to almost instantly respond with an email. I'm not sure we do better work other than the fact that we can more readily assess research materials online, and that's good. So those are a few of the things I've noticed.
Well, I share your thoughts, because our periods of practice have been about the same, and I have the same feelings myself. John, I want to thank you. I really do. This has been a real enjoyable and a real help to the bar to hear your history in practice, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it also, Gareth, and appreciate the bar making the effort to preserve some of the old stories.
Thank you. Great. Let me see if we can come up.
I didn't get time to drink any of this water.
No, it's going on. Monica,